light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show, I have my friend Samuel Nez, and you're a Native American with a combination heritage of Navajo and indigenous Central America, or?
The indigenous Mexico, the Mexica people.
Indigenous Mexico, okay. Mexica. Okay. The question we wanted to wrestle with today, and of course this is much bigger than we'll fit into a half an hour, but maybe we can scratch the surface and get people thinking and you know, give other people ways of launching their own dialogues.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, we have self-agency and individuality, the idea that you should be able to speak up for yourself, that you have your own voice, that your voice should be heard and respected. On the other hand, we have tribal loyalty and community and wanting to respect elders and respect the people who you consider your own, assuming you have such a group.
Mm-hmm.
I feel very isolated myself, but this isn't a discussion about my isolation. It's a discussion about balancing individuality and self-agency with tribal loyalty and community. You said you had a particular experience that might illustrate this.
So being born on the reservation in Shiprock and being a part of the culture for a good portion of my life.
Mm-hmm. Shiprock, New Mexico.
Shiprock, New Mexico.
Okay.
There's a certain point in which, you know, I want to be able to find myself and see what I can provide in this world for others.
Make your own unique contribution.
Exactly. And to bring in the tribal loyalty, it's kind of expected when you're Navajo to live within the four sacred mountains in the Four Corners region in the Southwest, to live in the area that we came from, where our stories are from, where we talk of the different areas. And
when you say the four sacred mountains, those essentially define the Navajo reservation geographically?
Yes.
Okay.
So, you know, you have they're aligned with the cardinal points, and it spans a good region. It's roughly 27,000 square miles, and okay. I lived on the edge of it, between Shiprock, New Mexico, Red Valley region, okay. and off and on in Farmington, New Mexico, which is probably 20 minutes away from the border of okay. the Navajo reservation. And to go back and forth in such a close area it's accepted, because now in this day and age, it's expected to be able to have communication with jobs and with
things that are off the reservation.
With things that are off the reservation, especially
okay.
if it's close. So going back and forth between Red Valley in New Mexico and parts of Arizona into Farmington, New Mexico, which is off the reservation, because they're so close, that could be accepted as a tribal loyalty. But
okay.
now I don't live on the reservation, and I'm considered an urban Indian, and it's not always accepted. But what they expect is that I always remember where I came from and that I continue to go back.
So the standards have relaxed.
They have, at least in the Navajo Nation. Okay. I can think of a friend that I have who is Apache, and their reservation is so much separated from the North American.
So they're more isolationist. They don't deal with the world outside of the reservation as much.
And they have to ask for permission to leave their reservation. Whereas I never had to.
It must be heart-wrenching to have to make a decision where the tribal leadership essentially puts you between a rock and a hard place, saying you will have to choose your individuality or you will have to choose tribal loyalty, because there apparently isn't any solution that satisfies both.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have to ask to leave, and then if they want to go back to visit family, they have to ask if they can go back. And if they say no, well...
So leaving that particular reservation may mean losing contact with your family from that point on.
And losing your tribal loyalty.
And I wonder, I mean, not to digress here too far, but the basic dynamic of that sounds very similar to when I finally discovered that I'm a gay man. And in recognizing that truth, one of the things I remember noticing quite clearly is that if I embrace this truth of myself, it could literally cost me every social contact I had. And, you know, here we are 20-some years later, and unfortunately it has. There is no one in my life at this point who knew me before I discovered and accepted the truth of my orientation. They're all gone. I'm estranged from my entire family and everybody I grew up with. Everybody's gone. You know, for me, the alternative would have been to engage in some aspect of self-denial or pretending to be something I'm not in order to maintain their approval. And to me, that was psychological suicide. So I chose to embrace the truth, and this is where it led me. I'm not saying that's everyone's choice. I'm not saying it's an easy choice. But it sounds somewhat similar to the sort of choice for some of the more conservative reservations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that you're essentially having to choose between your future within the 21st century and your bonds, your interactions, your association with your past. It seems tragic to me that anyone would ever be put in a position of choosing between past and future instead of being able to integrate both. But I would imagine even as for those who have chosen to embrace their future, they superficially don't get to take their family with them because that's been administratively blocked.
Mm-hmm.
On an ideological and spiritual level, though, I would try to encourage those people and say, but you do take them with you in spirit. The way you perceive the world, the way you think, the way you speak, the way you act, all of that is shaped by all those people whom you loved. And even if they choose not to be part of your life from that point on, their fingerprint, if you will, upon your life will always be there.
Mm-hmm. So with that being said, my life on the reservation is always with me. I may not go back as often as possible just because, and I can safely admit some of them would not be appreciative that I left, and they would say I forgot myself. I don't know who I am because I don't live there and I'm not continuously immersed in my culture. But I could protest to that and say, but I recognize my culture every day. I recognize where I came from every day because that's what makes me me. And
that points to a disagreement about what the definition of self is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when somebody else tries to tell me I know who you are, I'm like, how could you? You don't know what I think or feel or how my brain works or anything. How could you possibly make such a claim? I understand, valuing cultural heritage and everything, but to go so far as to say I know you better than you know yourself sounds horrendously arrogant to me to make such a claim.
And it is.
Is that my Western view, or is that something that you feel also?
I would agree with that.
Okay.
The only way to let me think on that for a second. The only thing that would really hold you back from that is when other people don't acknowledge that you can continue to have your loyalty to your old self with your new self. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? As long as it's in a positive form.
So it's kind of the question of whether you and them or whomever is involved has sufficient breadth of vision that they can see past and future coexisting.
Mm-hmm. So with my nation, I may be able to freely leave and come back just because I still have ties with my family, and I may always be curious on such things. But if I were to, let's say I wanted to go into the Navajo Nation government,
Mm-hmm.
that would probably not be accepted. Not only because
of you not living on the reservation.
because I don't live on the reservation and that I left for such a long period of time. I mean, I've lived off the reservation now for probably 10 years.
Okay.
And that would definitely not be accepted. You would have to ask for let's say, a medicine man had to go do a ceremony for somebody that didn't live on the reservation.
Okay.
They would have to ask not only themselves, they would have to ask other tribal leaders, and then they would have to have an accepting sign of it before they could leave and go do the ceremony. If they don't get any of that, then they can't. And if they were to go do it, then and somebody knew that it wasn't allowed, they would probably be shunned. So with me, to keep my tribal loyalty...
Which, shunning is actually a very psychologically devastating thing to do to someone.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's so pervasive that it just is positively unnerving.
It's a betrayal. That's how they
betrayal.
would... That's how, when you get sent, they would see a betrayal as you left your people to go be with them, whoever them is.
The betrayal prompts the shunning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But as long as you leave and you show that you're not necessarily betraying them, but trying to expand in a better way for yourself that you could bring back to the community, would be good. So I left.
Which is to say that sometimes the decisions you had to make, you had to accept others' perception of betrayal and know in your heart that you were making the right choice.
Yeah. If it was for a reason that had no true positive background to it,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I'm going to leave just because it's boring here and I could probably go find somewhere else that would entertain me, that would be considered a betrayal. But if I were to say I'm leaving because I need to better myself so I can come back one day
Mm-hmm.
and better the community with what I've learned, they're going to wonder about that. Well, are you really going to come back? But if I could prove that I was going to come back, or if that I was continuing to show my tribal loyalty, an example I could use is I continue to wear my headband to show that I still have a connection to that place,
Okay.
to what I learned there, to what I was told there, and what was confirmed to say that I can wear my headband every day, or the fact that I continue to show through my tattoos. This is a Navajo symbolism, and to bring it out into the world and show the people some of our own things, they would say that, well, that's okay. If I were to go and not talk about my culture, and not talk about what is accepted there, they would probably think that I shunned them and I betrayed them. Whereas they, instead of them, well, it's always about them, as in my nation being betrayed. I can't have, they don't betray me because they're more of a whole group. Does that make sense?
Okay. I mean, I would still be inclined to say that sometimes it is the larger nation which betrays the individual. But I can accept that that's not the way their logic runs, that their assumption will always be that the community is always right and the individual is always wrong. Clearly there are exceptions to that, in my opinion, but I don't know whether any particular people or group is ever willing to acknowledge that there are exceptions. There may be instances in which they recognize that they did make a mistake, but I would imagine those are few and far between.
Yes.
I don't remember what it was called now. There was a movie I saw on TV a number of years ago about a woman who was allegedly I believe, Navajo child taken from her family as a child and adopted to some Eastern family, and then she grew up and found out that she was Navajo and reconnected with her roots and all this, thought she would really be Navajo and move back on the reservation and all this, and discovered various problems of bullying and misbehavior within the Navajo school. And the men who were running the school didn't want to address it. And so she basically had to go around and talk to the mothers, and it was very difficult to get anyone to stand up and call the tribal leadership to account, to hold them accountable for their choices. But it finally comes down to a meeting at the end of the movie where finally the mothers find their voice, and one by one they stand up in the meeting and say, I will speak on behalf of my daughter. I will speak on behalf of my daughter. I want an investigation. I will speak on behalf of my daughter. I want an investigation. And it was so neat to see them as a people standing up for what was right. And yet doing so in a way that was, and of course when there were suddenly 15 women in the room saying, I will speak on behalf of my daughter, I want an investigation, then suddenly all the men sitting behind the table said, well, then we'll have an investigation. It's sometimes all it takes is calmly saying what needs to be said.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly those women were not betraying their tribe, but they were holding their tribe accountable to a higher standard of goodness than what was in practice within the context of that movie. Which to me would be an example of the individuality and the tribal loyalty finding a constructive integration.
Mm-hmm. She turned to the tribe to find herself, right?
She returned to the tribe to find herself. She was married to a man who was clearly not Navajo, but it was interesting as time went on how they learned to respect each other, and how the children who were half Navajo and half Irish or Scottish or whatever it was. I don't remember what the other nationality involved was, but how they, in turn, given an opportunity, embraced their Navajo heritage. Even though, initially they had to look in the mirror and say, I never knew it, but I'm a half-breed. And then to take that and make it something good, instead of something questionable.
So from becoming a half-breed to becoming something like a hybrid, which would have qualities of both that would better themselves, right?
Qualities of both, but specifically embracing the rituals and traditions and understandings of the Navajo reservation. That when it was explained to them, this is a rite of passage for young women. And the daughter says, oh, okay, I'll do it. And throws herself into it. When the grandmother wanted to show about weaving, and she says, yes, I would like to learn that, and embracing it. She was an individual. She was making the choice. She was given an opportunity as an individual. And as an individual, she said yes. And so the two were able to fuse, the tribal loyalty and the individuality. That's the way the Hollywood script wrote how Hollywood wrote the script of that movie. The challenge for us and for everyone in the viewing audience is, okay, I have to deal with real life, where happy endings aren't necessarily guaranteed, but we keep working toward them anyway.
So an example comes to mind. A cousin sister of mine in my family, much like me, left the reservation, left the Four Sacred Mountains. She joined the Army, and she left for a number of years, and she found a husband who is of Asiatic descent, I'm sure.
Okay.
And when I view my family, a lot of times I'll see some traditional family, and I'll see some that are non-traditional that have either converted to a form of Christianity and have left the culture and embraced something new, while still bringing in some of the culture sometimes. But with my cousin's sister, she left and she found this man, and he wanted to marry her, and all of a sudden...
And they genuinely loved each other.
And someone I am watching her and seeing her as I grew up, I would never think of her as being traditional, having the traditional knowledge but not actually being traditional. But all of a sudden, when they wanted to get married, she insisted that they had a Navajo wedding.
Wow.
And to see that with the wedding basket and the blanket was beautiful, to see that well, now that you're a part of my family, I'm gonna show my tribal loyalty because I'm bringing you into my land, and because I went into yours.
Okay.
I learned your culture, you learned mine, and that's where the integration comes in, where they keep themselves, but they're also bringing in the tribal loyalty. And
So they're creating a hybrid.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
it's amazing. They had a daughter, and actually I just got a phone call recently that. And I thought, well, maybe the wedding ceremony is the only traditional thing they're going to do. There's a lot of different ceremonies throughout a boy's life and a girl's life. The girls actually tend to have a lot more ceremony.
What are sometimes called rites of passage.
Rites of passage. Well, one of them it's called the first laugh.
First laugh.
The first laugh, and when the baby or the child has a first laugh, there's a small feast held, and the baby they get the wedding basket, and the baby has to give everybody a little gift. And they say if you don't do this, it's so the baby can learn to not have ego, and always have humility and giving, even though that they can enjoy themselves.
How do you teach a baby to give rather than hang on?
I think it's more of the energetical aspect of it.
Okay, because I was going to say, every little kid I've been around, you give them something, they grab it and they won't let go.
Let's say the baby's only 6 days old and it laughs. I don't think that baby's going to remember. I had
so the laugh could come as early as 6 days.
Well, possibly, and I think.
Okay, I was imagining a 2-year-old or something.
Well, I'm not sure how old my cousin sister's daughter is. Navajo family gets very complicated.
But that does point out how it's this interesting attentiveness to the actual unfolding of life.
Mm-hmm.
That as much as we have a tradition of how everything is supposed to be, we also have a watchfulness for how life is. Exactly.
Well, they had this ceremony, or no, it's going to be fairly soon, I think, because I just got the call. Okay. And the baby had her first laugh, and they're going to have a ceremony. And again, I was caught off guard, like, oh, she went out and left the reservation and became immersed in a different culture. And she joined the army. Mm-hmm. That's a whole other culture in itself to me. Mm-hmm. But she remains a part of her culture, and she keeps her tribal loyalty because they're going to have a first laugh ceremony. And I saw this, and to me that's inspiration to me.
To me, the rites of passage are how you create coherent sense of meaning within an individual life. Mm-hmm. So it's as if the individual needs the tribe just as much as the tribe needs the individual. You know, if either one is lost, you wind up with half of an equation and a place of emptiness where there should be something.
Exactly. And so with my own personal story, I left, and I do my best to continue my my cultural awareness and to continue some of my practices through my Navajo culture as well as my Mexica culture. And I think a lot of the inspiration came from my cousin's sister. Was she went out into a whole other culture, but she remained her tribal loyalty, and I do my best to do that. And I think anybody can.
Were there when she was, quote, out there, were there things she specifically declined or didn't do because of her cultural heritage?
Well,
do you know?
I wouldn't actually be sure, but I do know that she kept a lot of her traditional dress. I would say is she kept her Navajo blankets close, or pottery, or such things. But
even if they weren't actively being used, they were absolutely retained like family heirlooms in a trunk.
Exactly, and the symbolism behind it was still there with her, even though it wasn't being used.
She knew the symbols.
And she knew the symbols behind everything.
It still makes me roll my eyes every time I think of it. Growing up in a Roman Catholic church, German Catholic church in southern Wisconsin, and I was always fascinated by the stained glass windows, and it totally mystified me the first time I asked an adult who the faces in the stained glass windows were. And I discovered, oh my God, none of the adults in the church knew who the faces in the windows were. And it's like, but this is your church. What do you mean you don't know who that is? I don't get it. This is your faith. It bewildered me, that they didn't know their own faith.
Well, so touching back up on the initial topic is, I acknowledge myself as a person who left the reservation and moved here to further myself in not only in education but social interactions with not just family, because I mean family. She's my cousin's sister, but a distant relation. But I have clan cousins and clan aunts. Well, there's no aunts in Navajo tradition, but clan grandmothers. So I came here to further myself in education and social awareness, but I also retain my tribal awareness, I would say, because I still recognize a lot of the symbolism that's there. So I continue to find myself,
Well, and as we wind up this episode, I guess it's the reassuring accomplishment that both can peacefully and empoweringly coexist. It doesn't need to be an either or choice. It's both and.
yes,
Thank you very much for everything you shared today.
thank you.
And thank you for watching.